Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Farah, and today I'm going to be telling you guys a little bit about my January reading month and how it went and the books that I really enjoyed. I'm also going to be sharing with you a tiny little classics book haul that I have, as well as some ideas for my February TBR. So let's get started. So the first book I wanted to mention is just this random book I have had on my bookshelf for ages, for years really. And this is called Summer in the City by Sisman. And this is I would say it's definitely a chick lit, really cute, definitely one of those books that is easy to read, easy to pick up and put down multiple times. And it's just one of those feel good books that I really enjoyed. So this book focuses on two characters. First, a woman named Suze who lives in London, and second is about a guy named Lloyd who lives in New York City. They both work for an advertising company, but they work in the different branches within those two cities. So they end up participating in a job swap where Suze ends up taking Lloyd's position in New York City and Lloyd goes to London to take Suze's position. So the story follows both of their journeys in these new cities that they're exploring and some of the fun that they're having and their adventures. So we follow this sort of scandal that unfolds within the New York company that Suze gets dragged into, not knowing what's going on. Once she finds out the truth, she realizes what a mistake she's made. And the two people don't even really start talking until the middle of the book. So it's a slow burn kind of journey. It talks about Suze and Lloyd and their plans to sort of get his job back and have this adventure that they go on, and how they start to fall in love. So it was a really cute read. It had a really satisfying ending. Like I said, 3.5 stars, nothing exciting, nothing that I'll really remember, but it was fun while I read it. Next up, we have a book that I read called The Iron Duke by Meljean Brook, and this is part of, I think it's a trilogy. It's either a trilogy or a 4-book series called The Iron Seas. And this is a steampunk historical romance that takes place in an alternate past. So it takes place in the Victorian era in this steampunk-filled London, England area. And it focuses on this woman named Mina, who is a part of the London police force. And she's called to investigate this death that occurred at this guy's house, who we know as the Iron Duke. So there's a whole bunch of backstory with this. When I started reading the novel, I felt like I missed a book. Like, you're kind of thrown right into the story, and then the world building kind of unfolds as you go. So we know right away that there was this horrible thing that happened to these people years earlier. It's an alternate history timeline where the Khan dynasty ended up being successful in taking over Europe and parts of Africa. And what happened was the Khan planted these nanotech bugs into tea and sugar that was imported to Britain. So unbeknownst to them, the British consume these nano agents. The Khan, which is known as the Horde in the novel, the Horde is able to control the people of Britain by these specific radio towers. It can control their emotions. It can make them do things they don't want to do. It can make them copulate with other people against their will to produce more offspring with these nanoagent bugs that continue genetically down the line. So the Iron Duke was a mercenary, a pirate, kind of doing his own thing, but he ended up, somehow he was able to get close to this tower, which normal people with these bugs in them were not able to, and he was able to destroy the tower, setting England free. So there's a group of people called the Bounders, which ended up fleeing to the United States, or the Americas as it's known in the book, and they all come back once England is free. So there's this political dynamic between what's known as the Buggers, the people that had to stay in England, which were a lower class, more less income type of people that couldn't afford to escape, versus these Buggers, who were the more wealthy aristocratic families in England that were able to escape and then come back, and they're all merged together now trying to reestablish their government and their hierarchy and all these different components within their world. So Mina gets called to investigate this body that was dropped at the Iron Duke's house. And he's just this huge guy. His bones are made of iron. There's so much to get into with the world building, it's hard to explain, but steampunk all the way. They have advanced technology than what we have now, even though it's set in the past. And overall, what I liked about this book was the world building was incredible. It really painted a picture of what London looked like. what it felt like to be there, the sights and the sounds. I mean, they really go on this adventure. They find this female pirate named Lady Corsair who has an airship. So the plot is really, was really detailed. I'll be honest, I stopped in the middle of it and I actually started from the beginning again because there were so many different characters. I couldn't remember who was who and what was going on. So if you do read this book, I recommend writing down the characters and the relationships because it really got confusing for me at first. But once I had that down and I did a reread, I really enjoyed it. The relationship part between the two main characters did leave a little less to be desired, in my opinion. I didn't like the extreme alpha qualities of the Iron Duke. He did become nicer throughout the book, but there was some questionable consent scenes, and I just thought it wasn't for me. You know, you might not be bothered by it, but I just didn't enjoy that part. Overall, though, the book, I gave it 4 stars for the world building, and the overall plot was fun, but I did feel like she could have done more. I mean, they were in a land filled with zombies and megalodon sharks and these giant kraken, and I felt like more could have been done with the plot, and I would have enjoyed that rather than focusing as much on the actual romance. So that book was still enjoyable, but I am interested in continuing on with that series. So I also read A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemmingway, one of the first classics I've read in a really long time. And this book, it was a trip, this book. This book was featured in my previous vlog if you're interested, which, yeah, I think you would be seeing that by now. So A Farewell to Arms tells the story of this guy named Lieutenant Frederick Henry. And he is an American architect that was drafted into World War I, and he served in the Italian army as an ambulance driver in the medical unit. So he basically drives to the front where the war is happening, picks up wounded soldiers, and brings them back for medical treatment. So we don't even find out his name for a while within the book, which is interesting. He falls in love with this nurse named Catherine Barkley after he sustains an injury from a mortar shell while eating dinner in one of the trenches. So he's on convalescent leave for a couple months, and he reunites with this nurse that he met before the injury, and they fall in love, and it's a love story, it's a war story, and it has a very interesting ending. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to talk about the ending. I actually made a separate video, which you can see here, I'll link it below, with spoilers where I talk about the ending, because this probably has one of the most famous endings that I know of a classic. Definitely the most memorable one that I will remember. But what I liked a lot about this book was that it had a very simplistic writing style, and I feel like it's very accessible to a lot of people. If you've never read a classic before, this was very easy to read. The language was easy, the sentence structure was easy. It was almost so easy that it made me question. I mean, I'm sure it was done on purpose, but the ease, the simplicity of the dialogue, the ease and the simplicity of the sentence that was written in kind of short clipped sentences, but it also had a lot of longer running stream of consciousness where the grammar wasn't even correct. He used a lot of the word and, he used a lot of the word very, but Hemingway really painted a descriptive picture of the environment that this lieutenant was in. I liked how he used contrast of the beautiful countryside in Italy where they were stationed, and then it would flip to the realities of the war. And it was written in a very objective form, I felt like. Kind of like a child that didn't really know about the real-time aspects of the war would perceive it. So it had that sort of simple, innocent quality, at least in the beginning. I really noticed that at first. Some of the side characters were really fun. I really liked the character of Rinaldi, who was an Italian surgeon and his BFF in the book. I liked how he referred to him as baby, and he was so affectionate with him. Then there was his friend who was a priest also, and there was a few different ambulance drivers that he connected with throughout the book. So the relationship between him and Catherine was interesting because it felt very simple. It felt very pure and innocent, even though it did seem very material on the outside, at least for Lieutenant Frederick Henry. He seemed really to focus on her outer appearance, and he just really liked her looks. She seemed to focus a lot on his sweetness, and she would always be constantly saying how sweet he was. So their relationship was like very wholesome. It felt like, I can see how a lot of people would find critique within the characters, though. You know, it was a book of its time, so I'm not trying to judge it. You cannot judge this novel based on anything currently that's being written. So for its time, I just felt a coziness with these characters. Ultimately, Lieutenant Henry has to return back to the front, and there's this famous retreat that happens where the Italian soldiers are retreating back. There's a lot of people deserting the war, and we see Lieutenant Henry's journey on what he goes through and how he finds his way back to Catherine and what happens with the remainder of their relationship. So a few things, even though the relationship itself was kind of odd, I kept trying to remember that these people were involved in the middle of World War I, and you cannot really base a realistic example of a relationship when two people like that are under extreme stress. They were caring for horrific wounds and really stressful situations and being surrounded by the fact that you could die at any second. You know, you're in the middle of a war. So that in its own had an interesting dynamic. Another criticism I kind of had within this book is that there were a lot of sections that had long bouts of dialogue between two people. And Hemmingway didn't put in those little fillers where it said so-and-so or said so-and-so. So you would kind of lose track of who was saying what. That was an interesting, weird thing that I found within the book. I read this as part of my YouTube book club that I joined in and participated in called Game of Tones, where we read a classic every month. And this is hosted by Emmy Reads and Carolyn, which I'll leave their channels below, two of my favorite booktube channels. Overall, I gave this 4 stars. Wonderful experience reading this. I really enjoyed it. And I will definitely be doing a reread of this again just to get more out of it. The next book on my list, which I raved about in a previous blog, was the romance novel I read this book called The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Marianna Zapata. This book was amazing. It probably is my all-time favorite romance book of all time at this point. This book follows two people. A woman named Vanessa is told in the first person point of view, so we get the entire perspective of just Vanessa throughout the whole novel. And this guy named Aiden, who is a professional football player from Canada working and living in the United States. So Vanessa is hired to be his assistant, and she does everything for him. She cooks for him, she does his laundry, she cleans for him, she sets up his social media, she does his photo shoots, she really just does everything for him. He's a very stoic guy. There's not a lot of emotion within him. He doesn't appreciate her, so she decides to quit. She has a huge amount of debt, but by working for him for 2 years, she's really put herself in a financial position where she can finally leave and start her own life and start her own graphic design business. So once she decides to leave, Aiden kind of comes crawling back. He finds out where she lives, and he begs her to come back and work for him. She decides she's not interested. The ship has already sailed. She's ready to move on, but he offers her this interesting proposition. He is having trouble with his visa and he wants to stay in the United States. So he asks her to come and marry him so that he can stay in the United States. So he offers to pay off all of her student loans, which is up to like $100,000. And then he also offers to buy her a house. They just have to stay married for 5 years and then they can get a divorce and move on. So Vanessa's really conflicted because she's totally shocked. She knows it's a felony and she is really scared to do it, but that mountain of debt that she's sitting on is weighing so heavily on her that she ultimately decides to go ahead and do it. And they agree to try to work on their friendship and to make it happen and to make it work, but she has to move in with him and kind of play that part. So throughout the book, it's a very slow burn romance. It's over 600 pages, so it really is like a slow burn romance. But what I loved about this book so much was that we really, really get to know these characters and we see a realistic version of a relationship come together. And the payoff is so worth it in the end. It is so satisfying. It's just one of the most satisfying romances I've ever read. And the main characters were so likable. Vanessa was so real. She had a lot of flaws. She was really funny. She just said a lot of things that I think all of us would have thought out loud. She was such a fun, likable character. And Aiden was just he ended up being such a sweet, like soft cinnamon roll kind of guy inside of this giant, like huge football player body. So I loved Marianna Zapata's writing. I loved how she describes chemistry, and I just really, really loved this book. I really loved it. So that I gave 5 stars. And then the final book of the month that I read was called The Reading List by Sara Nisha Adams. And this book was a different book club book that I'm in for my alumni college. And this book was phenomenal. I listened to it on audio. The audio narrators for this was really good too. So this was done by a 2-person cast, and it focuses on 2 different point of views. We have Alicia, who's a 17-year-old girl. She's working at a library for the summer. She doesn't really like reading. She doesn't really like people. But she decides to pick up this library job because her brother really highly recommended she do that because he always grew up loving the library. And then we have Mukesh, who is an older man in his 70s, and he's a widower with 3 daughters that are very kind of overpowering. They call him every day, they check in on him, they kind of boss him around, and they take over that parent role of him since his wife had passed, their mother. So the 2 end up meeting each other because Mukesh finds an old library book in the house that used to belong to the library that Alicia works at. And his wife, Nana, was an avid reader. She loved books. She loved reading. And she had checked out the book and never returned it. So he decides to read the book that he found, which is called A Time Traveler's Wife. And he ends up loving it. He feels closer to Nana through this experience. He finally kind of gets why she loved reading so much. So he decides to return the book to the library. He's never been there before. He doesn't know anything about libraries. And he goes to the library, meets Alicia, and asks her if she has any book recommendations. Alicia is really rude to him. She's not interested. She's having a bad day. And she kind of blows him off. And he leaves the library kind of upset. In the meantime, one of the patrons notices this interaction between Alicia and Mukesh. And he's a regular, he knows Alicia, and he gives her a book called To Kill a Mockingbird. He's like, you know what? I really think you should give him this book. I think he'll really enjoy it. So she runs after Mukesh before he leaves, but he just doesn't want anything to do with her. So Alicia's now stuck with this book, To Kill a Mockingbird. And inside the book, she finds a reading list of 8 different books that someone has recommended. And on the top of the list, it says, just in case you need it. So the books are written in a very specific order. We have To Kill a Mockingbird, we have Rebecca, and then we have The Kite Runner, and I'm probably not saying these in order, but we have Little Women, Pride and Prejudice, Life of Pi, and a few others that are just escaping me right now. So out of curiosity, Alicia decides to read the books on the list. Now, Alicia's home life is really stressful. She has an older brother named Aiden who works all the time, but they're both caring for their mother who is suffering from a lot of mental health issues. She's severely depressed, like disabling depressed, and they're both so young that they don't really know to help get her help. And so they're kind of trying to manage her and deal with her, but it's like walking on eggshells. Alicia's so stressed out. So as Alicia starts reading these books, she finds herself loving them, and she kind of escapes reality through these books. She feels so much emotion with each of these stories, and she just wants somebody to talk to about it. So she is able to reconnect with Mukesh, and she gives him each book as she's done with it and says, I recommend this book. So slowly they start to come together and they become friends, and they meet at the library and they start discussing the books that they've read. And each book you see through their perspectives has such a great impact on them and really helps soothe them and the sorrows that they're going through. Mukesh is dealing with the grief of losing his wife, and Alicia is dealing with the stress of taking care of her mom at home. So each book has a different sort of effect on them, and it was just really cool to see how they gained so much comfort from each of these books. So throughout the course of the novel, we just see this relationship grow and develop, and it has one of the most beautiful endings I can think of. It was so beautiful. It was so heartwarming. I absolutely loved it. And the audio narrators for Alicia and Mukesh's storyline was so incredible. So I highly recommend this book. 5 stars. I think this is my favorite book of the year so far, definitely. So that is what I read this month. I only got to 5 different books, but it's all about quality, right? So now I'm just going to share with you a really quick little classics haul that I did. So I ended up picking up this book, which is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I had all intentions of reading this during the Christmas holiday, but I just didn't get to it, unfortunately. I thought the cover was really cute. There's nothing super special about it, but it is one of the Puffin Classics version. So I don't know. I'm a Christmas person all year round. I have to take my decorations down at some point, but yeah, I'm excited to read this book at some point, and this will be my first Charles Dickens. I've never read anything by him. Next, I also got this copy of Once There Was a War by John Steinbeck, and this is the second book for February for the Game of Tones book club that I'm doing through YouTube. So I already have my copy, and I'm going to be starting this very soon. And I just got a used copy because I wanted to try to annotate it as I go, which I wish I had done for A Farewell to Arms, but this is one of the Penguin Classics edition with the black spine. And I do really like the cover. I don't know anything about this, so we'll see. And then I recently went to Barnes & Noble's, which I haven't been there in a super long time, but I ended up picking up 2 of the Barnes & Noble's Classics collection. So we have The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And I really love these hardback editions. They're absolutely beautiful. I love the covers. I love the spines. See if we can get a closer view of that. And I love the beautiful shimmery edges. Here's a quick look at the end pages, beautiful. And it has some illustrations throughout the book. So this is a book that I think I might save for the fall. This feels like kind of a fall read, so excited. I've never read anything about Sherlock Holmes before. And then lastly, to add to my Barnes & Noble Children's Classics collection, which I have over here, I ended up picking up Aladdin and the Arabian Nights. So this, I think, is a compilation of different stories. So this is what this cover looks like, just beautiful. And then we have a look at the spine and the back. Beautiful. I love these too because they always have a quote on the back. This one has gold edges. They all come with a ribbon placeholder. And then this is a look at the end pages. So excited to add another book to my Children's Classics collection. All right, so now we're just going to quickly go through some ideas I have for my February TBR. So one thing I want to continue reading is Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. This was one of my favorite nonfiction books of last year. This is excellent. This is an excellent, excellent nonfiction book about cultural history and the ideas of racism. And each year I try to read another chapter or another section. So this book focuses on 5 different important people within the history of the ideas of racism. And each year, I've read the whole thing before, but each year I try to just reread one section just to remember and to learn again about these different historical figures. So last year I read the section on Cotton Mather, and this year it's going to be focused on Thomas Jefferson. So I'm really excited to get back into this. The classics book that I picked for February is going to be The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And Beloved is on my reading list. It's part of the 100 greatest books of all time that I'm working my way through, but I did want to read her novel called The Bluest Eye. This book focuses on sort of this obsession that we can have about beauty and what is the beauty standards and how we place our value on what we look like and how that can be so devastating and unhealthy and just wanting to look a different way than what you are. So I'm really excited. I've heard that this is really good, so I'm excited to add this to my list as well. Another book I want to take a look at is this little cute nonfiction book I got a little while ago, and this is called The Little Book of Huga. And I think this is perfect to read during winter because it focuses on that feeling of comfort and coziness. And it's just like a quick little nonfiction. I might just pick through this, but this is one that I have on my list for February as well. This is by Meek Wiking, who is the CEO of the Happiness Research Institute in Copenhagen. But I am just a huge believer in that idea of being present and finding these cozy, comforting moments through everyday life. So I think this will be right up my alley. Next, I want to try to read this romance book called Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. And I've heard great things about this. I've heard that it's really cute and fun and just a really wonderful read. This is part of a trilogy of romance books within the 3 Brown sisters. So this is the first book focusing on Chloe, who's one of the sisters. So I am excited to get to this. I've had this for a while and I haven't read it yet. I've kind of been saving it. So I think I'm going to read this one as well. And the last book I want to try to get to this month is called Kindred by Octavia Butler. And this has gotten a bit more attention recently because it's been adapted to a new Hulu series called Kindred. And it follows this woman named Dana who is a Black American living in the 1970s, and she somehow gets transported back to the 1800s, and she's treated as a slave because there's no record of her, no papers for her, so she's pulled into the slavery system. So she doesn't know how she got there, she's trapped there, and she has to experience what it was like to be a slave back in that time at a plantation. And I guess she goes back and forth between the 1800s and then present time, but she never knows when she's going to be pulled back, and sometimes she's spending months at a time in this alternate timeline. So it talks about her struggles and her sense of compassion and her willingness to survive within these two different realms. And I'm really excited. I really think the premise is really interesting, and I feel like I'm really going to like it. So those are my hopeful plans for reading for February. If you guys have any ideas of what you'll be reading, or if you've read anything that I mentioned, please let me know. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.